My brother grabbed my wrist and told me I'd be the loving sister who helped him heal, or else he'd make sure everyone knew I missed the signs. When I asked him why he was doing this, he just said because she was becoming inconvenient. I walked away. That was 8 months ago. This morning, he was standing outside my apartment in tears. My brother's wedding was magical. His wife Lauren looked like a real-life Disney princess, and I could literally see my brother tearing up as she walked down the aisle. I never would have imagined what was really going on behind closed doors. I suggested we all go out for drinks to continue celebrating after the reception, but Jake seemed hesitant. He mentioned that Lauren thought it would be better if they headed straight to their honeymoon suite. I understood, and he promised we'd reconnect after Cabo. The changes started almost right away. Jake had gone from spamming the family group chat with updates and photos to never texting anyone back. My mom called me one night begging me to check up on him. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic, but I was the closest one to him, so I did it anyway. I expected him to answer and laugh about mom being stressed out for no reason, but I never saw him because Lauren was the one who answered. Jake is resting, was all she said, before slamming the door right in my face. As per my mom's request, I kept trying, but they all went the same way. Lauren would give a new excuse every time, and soon, I found myself worrying even more than my mom, because I was your atypical overworked social worker, who never really turned off the work side of my brain. So I did what any rational adult would do in that situation. I knew he finished work early on Wednesdays, so I waited outside until 2 p.m. hit and followed him all the way to Whole Foods. I was immediately struck by how drained and disoriented he appeared. He didn't even question why I was visiting a store 15 miles away from my home. I straight up asked him why he looked so pale, and he mentioned his medication seemed less effective lately. I breathed a sigh of relief because that meant the solution was simple. Well, in that case, you should consult your psychiatrist. No, he immediately interrupted. Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice. It's just that Lauren has everything under control. I just nodded because it was clear he wasn't going to tell me the truth. So that weekend, I showed up to their home with mom's homemade lasagna, which was really just a frozen meal from Target. Lauren informed me that Jake was at an emergency therapy session at some faraway clinic, so I stared right into her cold eyes and put on the happiest fake voice I could muster. Oh, I know where that is. I'll go pick him up. I wanted her to know that I didn't trust her, and I guess she took the hint because suddenly she snapped and said he had already booked an Uber home. And the next day, I got the phone call. It was Jake. I could hear the sound of water splashing in the background like he was in a bathtub. I feel like I'm losing my mind. The phone line had been cut off. I was so freaked out that I immediately told my mom about it, and we were both spam calling the house. But every time, Lauren would be the one to answer. And on the 9th time I called, she screamed, "I told you he needs rest," before blocking both our numbers. I couldn't sleep at all that night, and when I woke up, I got yet another call. But this time it wasn't Lauren, it was my Uncle Harvey. He told me that Jake had told him to tell me to stop being a jealous bitch. But when I asked Harvey what he thought, he told me he was just as worried as me. We were going to damn near force our way into that man's house until we realized that it's best to give up. Because later that month, we all received invitations in the mail. Him and Lauren were redoing their wedding vows. I was extremely confused, but the last thing I wanted was for Lauren to revoke my invite, so I just texted her saying that I couldn't wait to attend. And when the day came, Jake looked nothing like he did that day in Whole Foods. He had the usual boyish smile plastered on his face and made his usual cocky jokes. Then came the vows. We all surrounded them while they stood at the top of the room, and Lauren looked as confident as ever. Jake went first, but instead of saying anything, he took out a med bottle from his pocket. Lauren gasped. So I'm sure you've all been wondering why I've been acting so strange recently. And trust me, for a while I was too. But then I realized he then stopped talking, like he was deep in thought. Oh honey, do you want to tell them or should I? He asked, staring straight at Lauren. Okay, fine, I'll tell them. Lauren here has been replacing all my medication with placebos, so my entire life has been haunted by my schizophrenic psychosis spells every single day. The entire room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. That's when I noticed Jake's hands weren't shaking. His speech was too perfect. Lauren backed away, tears streaming. Jake, you're confused. Actually, I found your sugar pills months ago. Jake smiled coldly, but I kept taking them, while secretly taking my real meds too. Every episode you witnessed, acting, I needed witnesses. My blood ran cold. The bathtub call, staged, looking sick at Whole Foods, makeup. I even told Lauren you all triggered my episodes, made her protective. Uncle Harvey stepped forward. Jake, what you're saying is genius? Who'd believe the schizophrenic planned this? I'm the victim, remember? He looked at me. Thanks, sis. Your social worker testimony will destroy her. As Harvey called back up, the truth hit me. We hadn't been saving Jake from Lauren. We should have been saving Lauren from Jake. But who'd believe the abuser over the mentally ill victim? Jake had weaponized his own illness perfectly. The room erupted into chaos. Lauren collapsed onto a chair, sobbing uncontrollably while family members shouted over each other. Jake stood there with that same calculated smile, watching his masterpiece unfold. Uncle Harvey grabbed his phone and started making calls while my mother rushed to Lauren's side. I couldn't move. My mind raced through every interaction from the past months, every worried phone call, every slammed door, every excuse. Jake had orchestrated it all. My own brother had used his mental illness as a weapon, and I'd played right into his hands. Jake walked over to me, his footsteps deliberate and slow. He placed a hand on my shoulder and I flinched at his touch. His grip tightened slightly, not enough for others to notice, but enough to make his point. You did exactly what I needed, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. The concerned sister, the social worker who documented everything. Perfect witness. I jerked away from him, my stomach churning. Across the room, Lauren tried to stand, but her legs gave out. My mother caught her, holding her steady. Jake, how could you? Mom's voice cracked. Your own wife? Jake's expression shifted instantly to one of wounded confusion. Mom, she's been hurting me, making me think I was losing my mind. You saw how I looked, how scared I was. The performance was flawless. His voice trembled at just the right moments. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. Several relatives moved closer to him, offering comfort. They believed him. Of course they did. Lauren finally found her voice. I never touched those pills. Jake, please, tell them the truth. The truth? Jake's voice rose dramatically. The truth is that I found the sugar pills hidden in your jewelry box. The truth is that you told me my family was toxic, that they were triggering my episodes. You isolated me. More family members turned to look at Lauren with disgust. Someone muttered something about calling the police. Lauren's parents, who had been standing near the back, pushed through the crowd. Our daughter would never, her father said, his face red with anger. This is insane. Insane? Jake laughed bitterly. That's what she wanted everyone to think I was. Insane. Unmedicated. Dangerous. I watched him work the room like a master puppeteer. Every gesture calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. The scariest part was how natural it looked. If I hadn't seen that cold smile, hadn't heard his confession, I would have believed him too. Uncle Harvey finished his call and approached Jake carefully. We need to get you somewhere safe. Get you checked out by doctors. I'm fine now, Jake said, pulling out another med bottle. I've been taking my real medication for weeks. Had to hide it from her, but I'm stable. I'm myself again. Lauren's mother knelt beside her daughter. Honey, we're going to get you help. A good lawyer. No lawyers. Jake interrupted sharply. Then softer. I don't want to press charges. I just want her to get help. Maybe therapy, maybe medication of her own. I still love her, despite everything. The room collectively sighed at his apparent compassion. I wanted to scream. He was setting himself up as the forgiving victim, ensuring even more sympathy. Lauren looked at him with pure terror in her eyes. She knew what he was capable of now. We all did. But who would believe us? My cousin Sarah approached me. You must feel terrible. You were trying to help him all along, and she was right there, hurting him. I opened opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could I say? That my brother was a monster who had planned this for months? That Lauren was the real victim? Sarah would think I was in denial, unable to accept that my brother had been abused. Jake continued his performance, accepting hugs and words of support. He made sure to stumble slightly, to look fragile and broken. People rushed to steady him, to offer chairs and water. Meanwhile, Lauren sat isolated except for her parents and my mother, who seemed torn between her son and daughter-in-law. We should go, Lauren's father announced. This circus has gone on long enough. Wait, Jake called out. Lauren, I want you to know I forgive you. Maybe someday, when you're better, we can try again. Lauren's face crumpled. The manipulation was so blatant to those of us who knew, but to everyone else, Jake seemed like a saint, a mentally ill man who still loved his abusive wife. The narrative was set in stone now. As Lauren's parents helped her toward the door, she looked back at me. Her eyes pleaded for help, for someone to believe her. I took a step forward, but Jake's hand clamped down on my arm. Let her go, sis, he said loud enough for others to hear. She needs professional help. We can't enable her anymore. The words were perfectly chosen. As a social worker, I couldn't argue against getting someone professional help without looking suspicious. Jake had trapped me with my own profession. After Lauren left, the room slowly began to empty. Family members approached Jake one by one, offering support and phone numbers for divorce lawyers despite his protests that he didn't want to involve courts. Some glared at me for allowing the abuse to continue, for not seeing the signs sooner. Mom stayed close to Jake, fussing over him like he was a child again. We should have known. All those times she answered the door, all those excuses. I'm so sorry, honey. It's not your fault, Jake assured her. She was very convincing, made me believe I was the problem, made me think my own family was against me. Uncle Harvey pulled me aside. You okay? This is a lot to process. I nodded numbly. Harvey studied my face carefully, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Suspicion? Before I could be sure, Jake appeared at my elbow. Uncle Harvey, thank you for being there for my sister. She was so worried about me. It must have been hard watching me deteriorate. Harvey's expression hardened slightly. Yeah, it was. Funny how quickly you recovered once you got back on your meds. Jake's smile never wavered. Modern medicine is amazing. The difference is like night and day. I feel like myself again. And when exactly did you discover the fake pills? Harvey pressed. About 6 weeks ago, Jake replied smoothly. Hidden them in my car, started taking them at work. Couldn't risk Lauren finding out I knew. The timeline made sense. The symptoms, the behavior changes, even the bathtub call. Jake had thought of everything. Harvey seemed to accept the explanation, but I caught him glancing at me with that same questioning look. As the venue emptied, Jake insisted on driving me home. I tried to refuse, but Mom intervened, saying we needed to support each other. I found myself trapped in Jake's car, the silence suffocating. You played your part perfectly, he said once we were alone. The concerned sister, the professional who should have known better. Everyone will remember how you failed to protect me. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why would you do this to her? Jake glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Why does anyone do anything? She was becoming inconvenient, too controlling, too demanding. Divorce would have been messy, expensive. This way I'm the victim. I keep everything, including everyone's sympathy. She loved you. Love is just another word for control, he said. She wanted to change me, fix me, make me into her perfect husband. Well, now she's the one who needs fixing. We pulled up to my apartment building. As I reached for the door handle, Jake grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, just shy of painful. You're going to support me through this difficult time, he said. You're going to be the loving sister who helps me heal. Because if you don't, if you start suggesting crazy theories about me planning this, well, who's going to believe the social worker who missed all the signs of abuse, who let her mentally ill brother suffer for months? He released my wrist and I stumbled out of the car. As he drove away, I stood on the sidewalk shaking. My phone buzzed with messages from family members, some offering support, others expressing disappointment in my failure to protect Jake. I thought about Lauren, probably at her parents' house now, trying to explain something that sounded impossible. I thought about Jake, already planning his next move, secure in the knowledge that his victim status was unassailable. Inside my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and tried to make sense of everything. Jake had turned his mental illness into a weapon, and his family into unwitting accomplices. He'd used my professional instincts against me, knowing I'd document everything, create a paper trail that would damn Lauren. My phone rang. Mom, honey, I'm staying with Jake tonight. He shouldn't be alone. Can you come by tomorrow? Maybe bring some groceries? He's been through so much. I agreed because what else could I do? Jake had made me complicit in his scheme. If I tried to expose him now, it would look like I was protecting an abuser or in denial about my brother's trauma. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction. The medication story was brilliant in its simplicity. No one would question a schizophrenic man's erratic behavior when off his meds. The sugar pills were probably real, planted by Jake himself. The receipts, the testimony, the witnesses, he'd created an airtight case. But there had to be something he'd missed, some piece of evidence that could expose the truth. I thought about Lauren, isolated and disbelieved. I thought about Jake, probably sleeping peacefully in his bed, satisfied with his performance. Tomorrow, I'd have to face him again, play the supportive sister while looking for cracks in his story. Because someone had to help Lauren, someone had to stop Jake before he destroyed anyone else. As sleep finally took me, one thought echoed in my mind. My brother was a monster wearing a victim's mask, and I was the only one who could see his true face. The morning arrived too quickly. I dragged myself out of bed, grabbed the groceries Mom requested, and drove to Jake's house with dread pooling in my stomach. The front door opened before I could knock. Jake stood there in pajamas, looking perfectly rested while I felt like I hadn't slept in days. He took the bags from my hands and gestured me inside. Mom bustled around the kitchen, making breakfast. The domestic scene felt surreal after yesterday's chaos. Jake poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching me with those calculating eyes. Mom hugged me tightly, then held me at arm's length to study my face. Her own eyes were puffy from crying. She squeezed my shoulders before returning to the stove, flipping pancakes with mechanical movements. Jake ate slowly, savoring each bite while I pushed food around my plate. Mom kept glancing between us, her worry evident in every gesture. She refilled our glasses, adjusted the napkins, anything to keep busy. After breakfast, Mom insisted on cleaning up alone. Jake suggested we sit in the living room. I followed him, noticing how he'd already rearranged the furniture. Lauren's touches were disappearing. Her throw pillows were gone, her magazines cleared from the coffee table. He settled into his armchair and studied me. I sat on the couch, maintaining distance between us. The silence stretched until Mom joined us, perching on the arm of Jake's chair. She ran her fingers through his hair like she used to when we were kids. The doorbell rang. Jake didn't move, so I answered it. Uncle Harvey stood on the porch with my Aunt Victoria. They'd brought casseroles and concerned expressions. More family arrived throughout the morning. Each one hugged Jake, offered condolences, shared their shock about Lauren. I watched Jake work the room. He accepted comfort graciously, deflected praise humbly, and painted himself as the wounded but forgiving victim. Every word, every gesture was perfectly calibrated. When Cousin Benji mentioned seeing a lawyer, Jake shook his head sadly. When Aunt Victoria suggested therapy, he nodded thoughtfully. By noon, the house was full. Jake held court from his chair while I faded into the background. I studied him, looking for cracks in his performance. There were none. He'd prepared for this, rehearsed every possible scenario. My phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. My hands trembled as I read it. Lauren, borrowing her mother's phone, begging for help. She wrote that Jake had hidden her car keys, changed their bank passwords, and convinced her parents she was unstable. I deleted the message immediately. Jake was watching me from across the room. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. I forced a smile and showed him my blank screen. He nodded and returned to his conversation with Uncle Harvey. The afternoon dragged on. Family members came and went, each one reinforcing reinforcing Jake's narrative. I excused myself to use the bathroom and instead slipped into Jake's study. His computer was password protected, but I knew his habits. The password was our childhood dog's name and his birthday. His email revealed nothing incriminating. Everything was too clean, too careful. But in his drafts folder, I found something. An unsent email to Lauren dated 3 months ago, outlining his plan. My heart raced as I photographed it with my phone. The door opened. Jake stood there, that cold smile playing on his lips. He closed the door behind him and approached slowly. I backed against the desk, my phone clutched in my sweaty palm. He held out his hand. I shook my head. He sighed and sat in his desk chair, spinning it to face me. We stared at each other. The pretense finally dropped. His mask was off, revealing the calculating predator beneath. He explained calmly that he'd already changed that draft, backdated it to make it look like Lauren had written it, planning to frame him. He'd anticipated someone might search his computer. Everything had a contingency plan. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Whatever evidence I thought I'd found was worthless. Jake stood and opened the door, gesturing for me to leave. I walked past him, my legs shaking. In the hallway, Mom asked if everything was okay. Jake assured her we'd just been talking about his recovery. Back in the living room, I noticed Lauren's parents had arrived. Her father's face was stone, her mother's eyes red-rimmed. They spoke quietly with Jake, who listened with practiced sympathy. He offered them closure, forgiveness, even suggested family counseling. Lauren's mother broke down. She apologized for her daughter's actions, begged Jake's forgiveness. He embraced her, the perfect picture of grace under pressure. Her father remained rigid, but even he seemed to be wavering. I couldn't watch anymore. I made excuses about work and left. In my car, I called Lauren's number. No answer. I drove to her parents' house, but no one was home. The neighbors hadn't seen her. Panic rose in my throat. That evening, Uncle Harvey called. He wanted to meet for coffee. We sat in a quiet corner of a diner, and he studied me over his mug. He asked careful questions about Jake's behavior, about the timeline of events. I answered honestly, watching hope flicker in his eyes. He revealed that something felt wrong to him too. Jake's recovery was too quick, too complete. The story was too neat, but he also acknowledged the evidence was overwhelming. Everyone had seen Jake's deterioration, Lauren's controlling behavior. We parted with a promise to stay in touch. I drove home feeling slightly less alone. Maybe Uncle Harvey would be an ally. Maybe together we could find something Jake had missed. The next few days blurred together. Jake played his role perfectly, attending therapy sessions he'd arranged, meeting with a divorce lawyer he'd carefully chosen, even joining a support group for emotional abuse survivors. Each step reinforced his victim status. I tried reaching Lauren repeatedly. Her parents said she was staying with friends, getting help. They wouldn't give me contact information. Jake had poisoned them against anyone who might support their daughter. At work, I couldn't focus. My supervisor noticed and suggested I take some time off. I refused. Work was the only thing keeping me sane. But even there, Jake's influence reached me. Colleagues who knew about the situation offered sympathy for what my family was going through. One evening, I parked outside Jake's house and watched. He came and went freely. No signs of trauma or distress when he thought no one was looking. He'd even started jogging again, something he'd stopped doing months ago to sell his deterioration story. Mom called constantly, worried about both her children. She begged me to support Jake, to help him heal. The guilt was suffocating. I was failing as a sister, as a daughter, as a social worker who should have seen the signs. A week passed. Jake filed for divorce, citing emotional abuse and mental cruelty. He sought a restraining order against Lauren, painting her as a danger to his recovery. The legal system moved quickly when the victim was so sympathetic. I attended every hearing, watching Jake perform for judges and lawyers. His medical records, the testimony of family members, the documented deterioration, it all painted a clear picture. Lauren's lawyer seemed overwhelmed, unable to counter the narrative Jake had constructed. Lauren appeared in court looking hollow. She'd lost weight, her hands shook, her voice barely rose above a whisper. She looked guilty because she looked broken. Jake had destroyed her so thoroughly that her appearance confirmed his story. During a recess, I cornered Lauren in the bathroom. She collapsed against me, sobbing. She explained how Jake had isolated her, convinced her she was helping him by keeping his family away, how he'd gradually made her doubt her own reality. She revealed that the sugar pills were real, but Jake had planted them. He'd ordered them online using her credit card, hid them in her jewelry box, then discovered them. Every piece of evidence had been carefully placed. I believed her, but belief meant nothing without proof. Jake had anticipated every move, countered every possible defense. He'd turned his mental illness into an unassailable shield. Who would believe the abuser over the victim? We returned to the courtroom where Jake sat with Mom, accepting her gentle touches and whispered support. He caught my eye and smiled, that cold predator's smile hidden from everyone else. He knew I knew, and he knew it didn't matter. The judge granted the restraining order. Lauren couldn't come within 500 feet of Jake. Their shared assets were frozen pending divorce proceedings. She left with her parents while Jake accepted congratulations from our family for his bravery in standing up to his abuser. That night, I met Uncle Harvey again. He'd been doing his own investigation, talking to Jake's coworkers and friends. The stories didn't quite add up. Jake's behavior at work had been inconsistent with someone suffering from unmedicated schizophrenia. We compared notes, building a timeline of inconsistencies, but every discrepancy had an explanation. Jake had thought of everything. He'd created a perfect crime, one where he was the victim and the criminal simultaneously. Harvey suggested we talk to Jake's psychiatrist, but doctor-patient confidentiality prevented any disclosure. We were hitting walls everywhere we turned. Jake had exploited every protection meant to help mental health patients. Days turned into weeks. Jake's divorce proceeded smoothly. He kept the house, most of the assets, and all of the sympathy. Lauren disappeared from our lives, her parents eventually moving to another state to escape the shame. I continued working, but my heart wasn't in it. Every case reminded me of my failure to protect Lauren. My supervisor finally insisted I take leave. I spent my days researching, looking for similar cases, trying to find some precedent that might help. Jake thrived. He returned to work as a conquering hero, the survivor who'd overcome incredible odds. He started dating again, charming women with his vulnerability and strength. Each new relationship felt like a ticking time bomb. Mom worried about my obsession with proving Jake's guilt. She thought I was in denial, unable to accept that Lauren had fooled us all. The more I insisted on Jake's manipulation, the more she worried about my mental health. Jake used this to his advantage. He expressed concern about my stability, suggested I might need therapy to process the trauma. He painted my suspicions as projection, my inability to accept that I'd failed to protect him. Family gatherings became minefields. I watched Jake accept praise and support while knowing the truth. He'd weaponized mental illness stigma, turned our family's love into a weapon. Every gathering reinforced his narrative and isolated me further. Uncle Harvey remained my only ally, but even he began to doubt. The evidence was too strong, Jake's performance too convincing. He suggested we might be wrong, that maybe Lauren really had been the abuser. I saw my last support slipping away. One night, Jake called me. His voice was different, casual and relaxed. He suggested we meet for coffee, just the two of us. I agreed, hoping he might slip up, reveal something useful. We met at a quiet cafe. Jake looked healthy, happy even. He talked about his recovery, his new girlfriend, his plans for the future. Then he leaned forward and dropped his mask completely. He thanked me for playing my part so perfectly. My documented concerns, my professional reputation, my desperate attempts to help, all of it had strengthened his case. He couldn't have done it without me. I recorded the conversation on my phone, but Jake noticed. He smiled and continued talking, but now his words were carefully chosen. He spoke about forgiveness, healing, moving forward. Nothing incriminating, nothing useful. He paid for our coffee and left me sitting there, defeated. I had a recording of a loving brother discussing recovery with his concerned sister. Jake had won completely. immediately, turned even my attempts to expose him into further evidence of his story. I went home and cried for the first time since this began. The weight of failure crushed me. Lauren was gone, destroyed by someone who was supposed to love her. Jake had created the perfect crime, and I'd helped him do it. But as I lay there in the dark, something shifted. Anger replaced despair. Jake might have won this round, but he'd shown me his true nature. He'd revealed the monster beneath the mask, and monsters always made mistakes eventually. I started planning. If I couldn't expose what he'd done to Lauren, maybe I could prevent him from doing it again. His new girlfriend, Victoria, seemed nice, young, trusting, eager to help Jake heal from his trauma. Perfect victim material. I began documenting everything. Every interaction, every observation, every piece of Jake's pattern. If he tried this again, I'd be ready. I'd have evidence from the beginning, not reconstructed after the fact. Uncle Harvey noticed my renewed energy. I shared my plan with him, and he agreed to help. We couldn't save Lauren, but maybe we could save the next woman. We'd watch, document, and wait for Jake to reveal himself. Jake noticed our renewed scrutiny. He confronted me at Mom's birthday dinner, pulling me aside while the family celebrated. His mask was firmly in place, but his eyes were cold as winter. He warned me to be careful. Mental illness ran in families, he reminded me. The stress of recent events, my obsessive behavior, my paranoid delusions about him, it all painted a concerning picture. Who would believe the unstable sister over the recovering victim? The threat was clear. If I pushed too hard, he'd turn his weapons on me. He'd already laid the groundwork, expressing concern about my mental health to family members. I was one false move away from becoming his next victim, but I didn't back down. I smiled and wished him well with Victoria, mentioned how nice she seemed. His jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that my words had hit their mark. He knew I was watching, waiting for him to slip up. The game had changed. Jake had won the first round, but now I knew the rules. I knew his methods, his patterns, his weaknesses. He might be a master manipulator, but he'd taught me well. The student was ready to challenge the teacher. As the party continued around us, we stood in silent confrontation. Brother and sister, predator and protector, locked in a battle only we understood. The war for Victoria's safety had begun, and this time, I wouldn't lose. Mom called us back to the celebration, oblivious to the tension. We rejoined the family, masks firmly in place. Jake played the recovering victim, I played the supportive sister. But underneath, we both prepared for the next round. The weeks following Mom's birthday became a twisted chess match. Jake moved first, inviting Victoria to family dinners where he'd casually mention my struggles with accepting Lauren's true nature. I countered by befriending Victoria at the gym she frequented, establishing myself as the supportive future sister-in-law. Jake escalated. He started showing up at my workplace during lunch, bringing Victoria along. They'd sit in the lobby, Jake playing the devoted boyfriend while ensuring my colleagues saw him being supportive of his troubled sister. My supervisor pulled me aside after the third visit, expressing concern about my family situation affecting my work performance. I knew Jake was building a case against me, just as he'd done with Lauren, but this time, I was ready. I started keeping meticulous records of every interaction, every subtle threat, every manipulation. Uncle Harvey helped by casually recording family gatherings on his phone, capturing Jake's performances for later analysis. One evening, Victoria called me crying. Jake had convinced her that I was trying to sabotage their relationship out of jealousy. She begged me to stop spreading lies about him. I listened to her sob, recognizing the same confusion I'd heard in Lauren's voice. Jake was already isolating her, turning her against anyone who might help. I drove to their house immediately. Jake answered the door with that practiced look of concern. Behind him, Victoria sat on the couch, tissues scattered around her. He invited me in with exaggerated politeness, playing the role of the patient boyfriend dealing with his unstable sister. The conversation was a masterclass in manipulation. Jake let Victoria do most of the talking while he sat beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand or shooting me disappointed looks. Every time I tried to speak, he'd gently interrupt, suggesting I was getting worked up and should calm down. I left feeling sick. Jake had learned from his experience with Lauren, refined his techniques. He was moving faster this time, more efficiently. Victoria was already doubting her own perceptions, already defending him against imagined attacks. Uncle Harvey and I met the next morning at a park. He'd been researching Jake's past relationships, talking to old friends from college. The pattern went back years. Women who dated Jake had all left suddenly. All seemed traumatized. All refused to discuss what had happened. But without concrete evidence, it was just speculation. Jake must have sensed our investigation because he struck back hard. He filed a formal complaint at my workplace, claiming I was harassing him and his girlfriend. He included screenshots of texts I'd sent Victoria, taken out of context to make me look obsessive. He even had a statement from Victoria supporting his claims. My supervisor had no choice but to place me on administrative leave pending investigation. Jake had effectively removed me from my job, just as he'd removed Lauren from her support system. But he'd made one mistake. He'd moved too fast, gotten overconfident. I spent my forced leave diving deeper into Jake's history. I found his ex-girlfriend from college, Emma, working at a bookstore 2 towns over. She nearly ran when she saw me, but something in my expression made her stop. We talked for hours in the back room of the store. Emma's story was eerily familiar. Jake had slowly isolated her, convinced her she was losing her mind, used his mental health diagnosis as both shield and weapon. She'd left college to escape him, never told anyone what really happened. She still had nightmares about their relationship. She gave me something invaluable. Old emails from Jake outlining his manipulation tactics, written like academic exercises. He'd been practicing even then, treating relationships like psychological experiments. I photographed every page with shaking hands. Armed with this evidence, I reached out to more of Jake's exes. Most wouldn't talk, but 3 agreed to meet. Their stories were variations on the same theme. Jake would identify vulnerable women, love bomb them, then systematically destroy their sense of reality. He'd use his schizophrenia diagnosis to make them question their own perceptions, to make others doubt their stories. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Uncle Harvey helped me organize it, create a timeline showing Jake's pattern over the years. We had enough to establish a clear pattern of behavior, but would anyone believe us? Jake had spent months establishing himself as the victim. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mom called me one night, voice trembling. She'd overheard Jake on the phone, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate another stupid girl. When he realized she was listening, he'd immediately switched to his victim persona, claiming he was just processing his trauma through dark humor. But Mom had heard the real Jake for the first time. The seed of doubt was planted. She started paying attention, noticing inconsistencies in his stories, catching glimpses of that cold smile when he thought no one was looking. She began questioning the narrative she'd accepted about Lauren. Jake sensed the shift in Mom's attitude and tried to do damage control. He suggested she was being influenced by my delusions, that the stress was affecting her judgment. But Mom had raised Jake. She knew his tells, his manipulation tactics. Once she started looking, she couldn't stop seeing the truth. The confrontation happened at Sunday dinner. Jake had brought Victoria, who looked thinner, more anxious than before. She jumped whenever Jake moved, constantly sought his approval with her eyes. The transformation was happening faster than it had with Lauren. I arrived with Uncle Harvey and Emma. Jake's face went white when he saw her, but he recovered quickly, greeting her like an old friend. Emma stood frozen until Uncle Harvey gently guided her to a chair. Mom watched everything with sharp eyes. During dinner, Emma found her courage. She started telling stories from college, seemingly innocent memories that revealed Jake's patterns. Victoria listened with growing alarm as Emma described situations identical to what she was experiencing. Jake tried to interrupt, to redirect, but Mom shut him down each time. Then I placed the printed emails on the table. Jake's own words, describing his manipulation techniques, his experiments in psychological control. control. The room went silent as everyone read. Jake's mask finally slipped completely as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. He turned to Victoria, trying one last manipulation. He claimed the emails were taken out of context, that I'd forged them, that everyone was conspiring against him because they couldn't accept Lauren's abuse. But Victoria was looking at him with new eyes, seeing the predator beneath the victim's mask. The explosion was swift. Jake dropped all pretense, his rage erupting as he realized his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. He accused us all of jealousy, of trying to destroy him because he'd exposed Lauren. He even tried to use his mental illness one last time, claiming we were triggering an episode, but the performance fell flat. Everyone had seen behind the mask now. Victoria moved away from him, closer to Emma. Mom stood up, tears streaming down her face, and told Jake to leave. When he refused, Uncle Harvey stepped forward, phone in hand, ready to call for help if needed. Jake looked around the room, calculating his options. His support system had evaporated. The family that had rallied around him now saw him for what he was. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but not before turning back with that cold smile. He warned us we'd regret this, that he'd make sure everyone knew what we'd done to him, but the threat felt hollow now. His power had always come from manipulation, from making others doubt themselves. Without that, he was just a man who'd lost his audience. Victoria stayed behind after Jake left. She cried with relief, with recognition, with gratitude. Emma held her as she processed the narrow escape. Mom apologized over and over, horrified that she'd enabled Jake's abuse of Lauren. We all sat there, processing the truth we'd been blind to for so long. The next days were difficult. Jake tried to salvage his reputation, spreading stories about his family's betrayal. But without his careful groundwork, without his victim status, people began questioning his narrative. Some of his co-workers remembered inconsistencies. Friends recalled moments when his mask had slipped. I returned to work after the investigation cleared me. Jake's complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated. My supervisor apologized for the situation, praised me for handling everything professionally despite the personal stress. I threw myself back into helping others, using my experience to better recognize manipulation tactics. Victoria moved back with her parents temporarily. She started therapy, began rebuilding her sense of self. She and Emma stayed in touch, supporting each other through their recovery. Sometimes she'd call me, needing reassurance that she wasn't crazy, that what she'd experienced was real. We tried reaching out to Lauren through her parents. At first, they refused any contact, still believing Jake's version of events. But Mom persisted, writing letters explaining what we discovered, apologizing for failing Lauren. Eventually, Lauren's mother agreed to meet with us. The meeting was painful. We showed her the evidence, the pattern of Jake's behavior, the testimonies from his other victims. Lauren's mother broke down, realizing how thoroughly they'd been deceived. She promised to share everything with Lauren, to let her know she'd been believed all along. Jake disappeared from our lives. He moved to another city, started over with new people who didn't know his history. Sometimes I worried about the women he'd meet, the new victims he'd create, but we'd done what we could. We'd exposed him to those who mattered, saved at least one woman from his trap. Family gatherings were subdued for months. The empty chair where Jake used to sit reminded us of our collective failure. We'd all been so ready to believe his performance, so quick to doubt Lauren. The guilt was something we'd carry forever. Mom struggled the most. She tortured herself with memories, wondering how she'd raised someone capable of such cruelty. She started attending a support group for family members of people with personality disorders. It helped her understand that Jake's behavior wasn't her fault, that manipulation can fool anyone. Uncle Harvey and I grew closer through the experience. He'd been the first to doubt, the first to support my suspicions. We made a pact to always question the narrative, to look deeper when something felt wrong. Our family had learned a hard lesson about the danger of blind trust. 6 months later, I received a letter from Lauren. She thanked me for never giving up, for eventually seeing the truth. She was in therapy, slowly rebuilding her life. The divorce had been finalized and she was free from Jake's influence. She ended by saying she forgave us for not believing her sooner. I kept that letter in my desk drawer at work. Whenever I dealt with a difficult case, when someone's story seemed impossible or contradictory, I'd read it again. It reminded me that truth isn't always obvious, that victims don't always look like victims, that predators often wear the most convincing masks. The experience changed how I approached my work. I became better at recognizing manipulation, at seeing past surface presentations. I developed training materials for other social workers, teaching them to spot the signs we'd missed with Jake. If our pain could prevent others from suffering, maybe it meant something. Victoria eventually found real love with someone who respected her boundaries and supported her growth. She invited me to her wedding 2 years later. As I watched her walk down the aisle, radiant and confident, I thought about how different things could have been. She'd almost become another Lauren, another casualty of Jake's games. Our family never fully recovered its closeness. The betrayal had cut too deep, the guilt was too heavy. But we found a new kind of connection, one built on truth rather than comfortable assumptions. We learned to question, to verify, to look beyond the surface. Jake had taught us that monsters don't always look like monsters. I still think about him sometimes, wonder where he is, who he's hurting now. The urge to track him down, to warn his new victims, is strong. But I've learned that people have to see the truth for themselves. All I can do is share our story, hope it helps someone else recognize the signs before it's too late. The last I heard, Jake was engaged again. A friend of a friend mentioned it casually, not knowing our history. My blood ran cold at the news. Another woman was walking into his trap. Another family would be torn apart by his manipulations. But this time, there would be a trail. Emma, Victoria, and I had made sure of that. We'd created a network, survivors of Jake's abuse who could validate each other's experiences. If his new fiancé ever searched for information about him, she'd find our stories. She'd have what Lauren never had, proof that she wasn't alone, wasn't crazy, wasn't the first to see behind his mask. That's the only victory we could claim. We couldn't stop Jake from being who he was, couldn't prevent him from finding new victims, but we could bear witness, could ensure that his future targets had access to the truth. Sometimes that's all you can do. Shine a light in the darkness and hope someone sees it in time. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Sunday dinner was ready. I gathered my things and headed to her house, where Uncle Harvey and Aunt Victoria would be waiting, where we'd share a meal and carefully avoid mentioning the empty chair, where we'd pretend the family was whole, even though Jake's betrayal had left a permanent scar. But there was healing in our gatherings too, in the way we'd learned to really see each other, to value truth over comfort. Jake had tried to destroy us with his lies, but we'd emerged stronger in some ways. We'd learned that love means believing people when they tell you they're hurting, even when the truth is inconvenient. As I pulled into Mom's driveway, I saw Uncle Harvey's car already there. Through the window, I could see them setting the table, moving around each other with familiar ease. This was my family now, smaller, sadder, but honest. Jake had taken so much from us, but he hadn't taken everything. I walked inside to warm hugs and the smell of roast chicken. Mom squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything we'd been through. Uncle Harvey poured wine while Aunt Victoria filled me in on neighborhood gossip. We settled into our new normal, the family that remained after the storm. The empty chair would always be there, a reminder of how wrong we'd been, but it also reminded us of what we'd learned, how we'd grown. We'd faced a monster wearing a familiar face and survived. We'd saved Victoria and found some measure of justice for Lauren. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was real. And after everything Jake had put us through, real was enough.